The day they let me go, it wasn't just a job I lost, it was the version of myself I had spent decades building. My name is Lisa. I'm 47 years old. For the past 21 years, I worked at a company that once felt like home to me. I started there fresh out of college, full of drive and ambition. It was supposed to be temporary, just a stepping stone. But time passed and I stayed. I got good at what I did. I became reliable, stable, the one people could count on. I liked that about myself. I worked in accounting. Numbers, deadlines, accuracy. I thrived on structure. Over the years, I trained new employees, took on responsibilities outside my role, and received awards for my dedication. I was the kind of employee who skipped lunches to finish reports, stayed late to help a colleague, and never used all her vacation days. My colleagues called me the rock of the department. I thought that meant something. I thought I mattered. Then one day, everything changed. It was a Friday morning in early March. Cold outside, but I remember the sun was out, a rare gift in Minnesota. I had just brewed my second cup of coffee when I got an email from HR asking me to stop by for a quick chat. I wasn't nervous. I figured it had something to do with onboarding the new intern. I even brought my notepad. When I walked into the small, glass-walled meeting room, my manager was already sitting there, and beside him was someone from HR who barely made eye contact. That was my first clue. Then they said it, gently, almost apologetically. "We've been evaluating team structure and your role has been eliminated." Eliminated, like it was a typo in a spreadsheet. I remember blinking at them, trying to understand. "Is this performance-related?" I asked. "No, not at all," they said quickly. "This is a strategic decision. We're shifting toward a more modern approach, bringing in new perspectives." That was their way of saying, "You're not what we want anymore." They offered me a small severance package and a list of career transition services. I didn't even hear the rest. I nodded, stood up, and walked out with a hollow feeling in my chest. I was in shock. I didn't cry until I got home, and when I did, it wasn't gentle. It came in waves. I had given everything to that job, my energy, my time, my identity, and just like that, it was gone. Over the next weeks, I tried to bounce back. I updated my resume, created a LinkedIn profile, started applying for jobs, over 100 actually. Every time I hit submit, I told myself this one might be it. But mostly, I got silence. A few interviews here and there, but nothing ever came of them. I began to notice a pattern. Younger companies, younger teams, younger faces. It became clear they were looking for someone else, not me. Not Lisa. One interviewer even said, "You're very experienced, maybe too experienced." I smiled politely, but inside I was crumbling. I started questioning everything, my worth, my future, my place in the world. Who was I if I wasn't that job anymore? I stopped answering phone calls from friends. I canceled dinner plans. I didn't want anyone to see me like that, adrift, lost, defeated. But then something strange happened. One evening, I couldn't sleep. I got up and started going through an old box in my closet. Inside were things I hadn't looked at in years. High school notebooks, postcards, photographs. And then I found it. A small, oil-stained recipe card with my grandmother's handwriting on it. It read, "Cinnamon honey loaf. Bake at 375 for 40 minutes. Just holding it brought a wave of warmth I hadn't felt in months. I remembered the smell of her kitchen. I remembered how baking used to calm me. I remembered how, when I was younger, I once dreamed of opening a small bakery. Just a silly dream I'd pushed aside for more practical things. That night I sat at the kitchen table and whispered out loud, "What if it's not too late?" The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I baked. It wasn't anything complicated, just the cinnamon honey loaf from my grandmother's recipe card. I found myself nervously rereading the faded instructions, unsure whether I still remembered how to bake anything from scratch. But something about holding that stained card made me feel connected. To her, to myself, to something real. As I preheated the oven and measured out flour, cinnamon, and honey, the kitchen started to fill with a familiar scent, a scent I hadn't realized I missed so much. For a moment, I forgot I was unemployed. I forgot the rejection emails, the cold silence after interviews, the feeling of being invisible. In that moment, I was just Lisa, a woman in her kitchen, hands dusted with flour, following a memory. I sat at the table as the loaf baked, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like crying. I just breathed. When it was done, I sliced a piece and tasted it. It wasn't perfect, a little dry maybe, but it reminded me of being 12 years old in my grandmother's kitchen, sneaking bites before dinner. That memory hit harder than I expected. It made me smile, a real, full smile. The next day, I baked again. Then again. I started experimenting with small changes to the recipe, added a little orange zest, swapped honey for maple syrup. One morning, I even tried adding crushed walnuts. I wasn't baking for anyone but myself, yet each day I felt more alive. Still, I was broke. My severance package was running out fast, and unemployment benefits weren't going to cover much longer. Reality loomed like a shadow behind the oven door. I needed a job, any job. I kept applying. Retail positions, office assistant roles, even part-time work at local grocery stores. Most of the time I didn't even get a response. But somehow, every evening, I ended up back in my kitchen, measuring, mixing, pouring. It wasn't about survival. It was about sanity. And in those quiet hours, I started to ask myself questions I'd avoided for years. What if this isn't just a hobby? What if this is a way out? What if I don't go back to the version of me that everyone expected? I started bringing extra loaves to my neighbor, Mrs. Green. She's 72, lives alone, and always greets me with a smile when I take out the trash. When I handed her a loaf, her eyes lit up. "Did you bake this?" she asked, holding it like it was gold. "It smells like heaven." The next day, she left a note in my mailbox. "Lisa, this was the best thing I've tasted in years. Have you ever thought of selling them? I'd buy more in a heartbeat." She included a $10 bill. I laughed out loud. Was it ridiculous? Probably. But it also stirred something in me. For the first time since I was laid off, I felt like I had something of value to offer again. Not because of a title or a salary, but because I made something that brought someone else joy. That night, I pulled out an old spiral notebook and scribbled 2 words across the top of the page: "New plan." After Mrs. Green's note, I sat on my couch for nearly an hour, just staring at that $10 bill. I mean, it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was more the fact that someone, anyone, thought something I made was worth paying for. That feeling. I hadn't had it in a long time. It was like a tiny spark in the dark, so faint I almost missed it. The next morning, I baked again. This time, 2 loaves. One for me, and one, just in case. I wrapped it neatly in brown parchment, tied with string, and added a little handwritten label: "Cinnamon Honey Loaf, made by Lisa." I didn't know what I was doing, I just knew it felt right. On a whim, I posted a photo on my personal Facebook. The caption was simple: "Unemployed. Baking through the panic. If anyone needs comfort carbs, I've got extra." I shut my phone off after that. I wasn't expecting anything. Maybe a like or two, probably from old coworkers who felt sorry for me, but when I checked again that evening, there were over 40 comments. "How much for a loaf?" "I'll take 2. "This looks amazing. Do you deliver?" I blinked at the screen, not even sure how to respond. I hadn't priced anything. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have enough pans. I replied to a few messages, cautiously. $10 a loaf, I said, testing the waters. Most people answered with some version of, "Great. Can I pick it up tomorrow?" Suddenly, my quiet little kitchen didn't feel so quiet anymore. I ran to the pantry to check my flour supply. Not enough. I made a list: flour, sugar, cinnamon, honey, parchment paper, loaf pans. I used the last of my grocery budget that week to stock up. It was risky, stupid maybe, but it also felt like something more, like belief. Over the next few days, I baked and baked. I was up at 6 a.m., mixing batter, pouring it into greased pans, setting timers with flour-covered fingers. My apartment smelled like a holiday morning every single day. One afternoon, I delivered 2 loaves to a woman named Erica, someone I hadn't spoken to since high school. When she opened the door, she smiled, then paused. "Lisa?" she asked. "Wow, you look alive." I didn't know how to respond to that. But I think I smiled. Then something happened I wasn't ready for. Erica posted about the bread on her Instagram. A photo, a glowing caption. "This loaf tasted like it was baked with joy. Follow at Lisa Bakes. Trust me, you'll want in on this." Wait. At Lisa Bakes? I didn't even have an Instagram. That night, I sat down and made the account. Chose a simple profile picture, just a cinnamon loaf on a wooden board. Bio: former office worker, accidental baker, chasing joy 1 loaf at a time. I posted my first photo, then another, then another. I wasn't sure what I was building. It felt like something halfway between a dream and a day job, but for the first time in a long time, people saw me. Not as a resume, not as a number, just as Lisa. And I was starting to wonder, maybe that was enough to build something real. By the end of the second week, I had baked 27 loaves. My kitchen was a war zone, flour dust on every surface, cinnamon scent baked into the air, and 3 timers going off at once like a chorus of tiny sirens. My hands hurt, my back ached, and still, I felt alive. But the orders kept coming, not just from people I knew, strangers even. "My friend said your bread is like therapy," one message read. Another: "My mom's been depressed. Your loaf made her smile." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Somehow, this was no longer just about baking. People were finding comfort in what I made. Me, Lisa, laid off, forgotten, ignored, now creating something that mattered. But with that meaning came pressure. I was still using one old oven that took forever to preheat. I had 4 loaf pans in total. I washed them over and over again between batches, burning time I didn't have. Deliveries meant I was driving all over town, spending gas I couldn't afford. My tiny fridge was crammed with ingredients, barely leaving room for anything else. And then, the first real mistake happened. I mixed up 2 orders. I sent a raisin loaf to someone who hated raisins, and she wasn't shy about it. She messaged me, "This wasn't what I asked for. I wanted the apple crumble." I apologized, profusely, offered a refund. She didn't reply. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring at my hands. I was tired. Maybe too tired. That night, I heard my mother's voice in my head. "Don't do anything halfway, Lisa. If your name's on it, stand by it." She used to say that when I was a kid, after school projects, or when I left my room a mess. It never felt fair back then, but now, somehow, it felt like an anchor, like a standard. So I decided to change a few things. The next morning, I set up a basic spreadsheet, tracking names, orders, dates, ingredients. I made printed labels instead of handwritten ones. I looked up a small batch commercial kitchen nearby that rented space by the hour. Pricey, but maybe I could swing it 1 day a week just to catch up. I started batching deliveries, picking 1 day a week, setting time blocks, no more driving across town 3 times a day, and I ordered 4 new loaf pans online. It took almost all of what I'd earned, but I figured if I was serious, it was time to act like it. One afternoon, while prepping dough, my phone buzzed. A message from someone named Claire. She wrote, "I run a weekend market. We're looking for small batch vendors. Someone sent me a photo of your cinnamon loaf. Are you available this Saturday?" I froze. A market? Me? A vendor? I didn't even have a table. But something inside me, that little voice I hadn't heard in years, whispered, "Say yes, even if you're not ready." So I did. I barely slept the night before the market. I lay awake in bed, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking, what if no one comes to my table? What if they hate the bread? What if I run out too fast, or worse, don't sell anything at all? I hadn't done something like this in decades, not since college when I helped my roommate sell homemade jewelry at a campus fair. Back then, I just stood behind the table, smiling, mostly pretending I had anything to do with it. Now, there would be no hiding. This was my name, my work, my story. I had spent the entire week preparing. I used every pan I owned, every free minute, and nearly every gram of flour in my kitchen. The house was a blur of cinnamon, apples, crushed walnuts, and browned butter. I tried a new flavor, lemon blueberry, and wrapped each loaf carefully, placing hand-tied tags that read, "Baked with Heart, from Lisa." I printed a simple sign with my name, no branding, no logo, just black ink on white paper and a wish that someone would stop and look. But the night before the event, I stood in my kitchen and nearly fell apart. The counter was a mess. My feet were swollen, my eyes burned from exhaustion, and I saw the invoice for the ingredients, nearly $190. If the market flopped, I'd lose more than just time. I'd lose hope. Again. I whispered to myself, "What are you doing, Lisa? You're not 25. You don't know how to sell. This isn't who you are." And then I looked at the fridge. Taped to it was a faded photo of my daughter, taken when she was 6. Her hands were covered in flour as she laughed, helping me knead dough. It reminded me why I started all this in the first place, not just to make money, but to feel like myself again, to show her, even if she wasn't watching, that starting over wasn't just possible, it was powerful. That night, I made a decision. If I was going to fail, I'd do it giving everything I had, not halfway, not afraid, but proud. So I cleaned the counter, I loaded every loaf into boxes. I checked my list twice, and then, around 2:17 a.m., I fell asleep for 3 hours on the couch, arms wrapped around a tote bag full of cinnamon dreams. When morning came, I dressed in jeans and a clean white blouse. I pulled my hair back. And for the first time in a long time, I looked in the mirror and thought, "You look ready. You look like someone who belongs there." I arrived at the market just before 8 a.m. Vendors were setting up under white tents, arranging flowers, arranging jars of honey, handmade soaps, stitched baby clothes. It all looked perfect. I walked to my assigned space, a folding table, shade, 2 plastic chairs. That was it. I unloaded my boxes, arranging the loaves in rows, using an old wooden crate to create levels. I laid down a pale yellow cloth, nothing fancy, but clean, inviting, and then I waited. People started arriving, slowly at first, then in waves. I smiled, nodded, offered samples. Some walked past, others stopped. One woman took a bite of my walnut loaf and said, "Oh my God, that tastes like my grandmother's." I nearly cried. By 11:45, I had only 3 loaves left. At 12:03, I had none. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and a half-eaten walnut muffin, one I had saved for myself. I watched the sunset and thought, did that really just happen? I had sold out. Me, Lisa. The woman who just a few weeks ago was crying in her car after getting fired, the woman who thought she was too old to start anything new. I had sold every loaf I brought, not because someone handed me a favor, but because people genuinely liked what I made. It felt unreal. But before I could fully process what had just happened, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a woman named Monica, who introduced herself as the manager of a local cafe. She had stopped by my booth that morning, tasted the apple cinnamon, and asked for my contact info. Now here she was texting me. "Hi Lisa, your bread was amazing. Our customers would love it. Any chance you'd be open to wholesaling to us weekly?" I blinked at the message. Wholesale? Weekly? That word, weekly, echoed in my head. Could I even do that? It had taken everything I had to bake for one day. My kitchen was small. My oven could only handle 2 loaves at a time. I didn't have a commercial license. I didn't even know how wholesaling worked. I wanted to reply right away, to say yes. But my fingers hovered over the screen, frozen. Instead, I wrote back, "Thank you so much. I'm honored. Can I think about it and get back to you tomorrow?" She replied with a smiley face and a, "Of course. Looking forward to hearing from you." I sat with that message for hours. A part of me wanted to scream, "Say yes, Lisa." Another part, the old voice, whispered, "What if you mess it up? What if you disappoint her? What if you're just not enough? That night I made a list. A real one. Pen and paper. I wrote down everything I would need if I said yes. Bigger equipment, help with packaging, understanding permits, setting up a proper business name. It felt overwhelming, but also thrilling. For the first time in years, I wasn't just thinking about surviving. I was thinking about building something. The next morning, I woke up early and called my friend Rachel. She was a retired accountant who used to work with small businesses. We hadn't talked in months, but she picked up on the first ring. When I told her what was happening, she said, "Lisa, this is your moment. You don't have to know everything. Just start where you are. We'll figure the rest out." That afternoon, I drove to the cafe. It was warm and cozy, with tall windows and the smell of fresh coffee. Monica greeted me with the biggest smile and said, "People haven't stopped talking about your bread. I meant what I said. We'd love to feature you, maybe even do a little local baker of the month thing." She showed me the shelf where my loaves could go. It was right by the register, prime spot. As I looked at it, I felt two things: terror and joy. I turned to her and said, "I'd love to. Let's do it." The first week of baking for the cafe nearly broke me. I had said yes, with a full heart, but not with a full plan. I spent the first 2 days reorganizing my kitchen. I cleared shelves, moved my dining table to make room for cooling racks, and made a space in the garage for ingredients I had to buy in bulk. By Wednesday, I had flour in my hair, cinnamon under my nails, and stress in every joint of my body. The first batch of loaves was a disaster. One came out undercooked, another burned on the bottom, and one just collapsed in the middle like it had given up entirely, just like I wanted to. I sat on the kitchen floor and stared at the mess, breathing heavily. My hands ached, my back throbbed. I hadn't eaten since morning. I was 47 years old and trying to run a one-woman bakery out of a 2-burner oven. What was I thinking? I almost texted Monica to back out. I even typed it, "I'm so sorry, but I don't think I can..." But I didn't send it. Instead, I called Rachel again. Her voice was calm, reassuring. She listened to my rant, to the tears I didn't even try to hide, and then she said, "Lisa, you're exhausted, not incapable. Sleep, shower, and try again tomorrow." So I did. That night I went to bed at 9 p.m., the earliest in years. I woke up at 5 a.m. I made tea, stretched, and turned on the oven. This time I worked slower. I followed my instincts. I stopped trying to make it perfect and just made it real. By 10 a.m., the kitchen smelled like warm cinnamon and toasted walnuts. I delivered my first official batch at noon. Monica hugged me like I'd just come back from war. She placed the loaves on the shelf and even made a small chalkboard sign, "Try our new local favorite, Lisa's Walnut Whirl." I stood there and stared at that sign. My name, in a real business, on a real shelf. But I also knew, if I was going to keep doing this, something had to change. I couldn't do it all alone. That night, I made another list. This one started with a single question. What if I hired help? I never thought hiring someone would feel like such a risk, but a week after my first delivery, I put up a small sign at the community center: "Part-time baking assistant needed, experience welcome but not required, heart matters most." I wasn't expecting anyone to show up, but 2 days later, Ava walked into my life. She was 22, recently graduated from culinary school and full of nervous energy. Her eyes lit up when I told her what I was building. I trained her in my kitchen, teaching her how to fold walnuts into the batter just right, how to listen for that soft, hollow sound when the loaves were perfectly done, how to care about the people who would eat what we made. With Ava, everything became easier. We developed a rhythm, a quiet, joyful flow. She called me chef, even though I never asked her to. Soon, our orders doubled. Monica expanded our shelf space. Then a nearby bookstore asked if they could carry our muffins. Even a local office wanted weekly deliveries. One night, as Ava and I boxed up an order, she turned to me and said, "Lisa, you need your own place. You've outgrown this kitchen." I laughed, but that sentence stuck with me. That weekend, I walked past a tiny vacant storefront on Rosewood Street, faded brick, dusty windows, a crooked "for rent" sign. I pressed my hands against the glass and imagined it, the smell of baked apples drifting out, a chalkboard menu with my name on it, wooden tables filled with people laughing over coffee and warm bread. I called the number. It was terrifying. The lease was more than I'd ever committed to, but I remembered something Rachel once told me. At our age, fear's not the enemy. Regret is. 3 months later, Whirl and Hearth opened its doors. Ava was by my side, beaming. Monica brought flowers. Rachel flew in to be at the opening. And my kids? They were proud in a way I hadn't seen since they were little. I watched a line form outside my bakery, and felt something bloom in me that I thought had withered years ago. Not just confidence, not just hope, but joy. So if you're listening to this and wondering if it's too late, if you're doubting whether the world still has room for your dream, let me be the one to tell you, it's not too late, you're not too old, and you're just getting started.